Imagine a windswept plain under an endless blue sky, where a child destined to change the world is born. According to legend, baby Temüjin, the boy who would become Genghis Khan, entered the world clutching a clot of blood in his tiny fist. It was a sign, people said, that he was destined to be a great warrior. Little did they know just how true that would be. From humble beginnings marked by betrayal and hardship, Temüjin rose to unite the Mongol tribes and carve out the largest land empire in history. His life is an epic tale of perseverance, ruthless ambition, and visionary leadership that still captivates us centuries later. In this video, part of our Leaders Who Shaped History series, we'll journey through Genghis Khan's rise and monumental conquests. We'll experience the drama of his early struggles, the ferocity of his battles, and the strategies that helped a nomadic warrior topple mighty kingdoms. Get ready for a conversational and motivational look at one of history's most transformative figures, a man who tried to rule the world and almost succeeded. Stay tuned to the end for a special message and make sure to like, subscribe, and join the conversation. Genghis Khan's story begins not in palaces or cities, but on the remote Mongolian steppe, a land of rolling grasslands, fierce tribes, and unforgiving survival. He was born Temüjin around 1162 near the modern border of Mongolia and Siberia. His father, Yesugei, was a minor tribal chieftain of the Borjigin clan, and his mother, Hoelun, was originally from a rival tribe. In fact, Temüjin's mother had been kidnapped by Yesugei and forced into marriage, a common practice on the steppe in those violent times. From birth, Temüjin's world was one of conflict and resilience. When Temüjin was about 9 years old, tragedy struck that would shape his destiny. His father Yesugei was poisoned by enemy Tatars while returning home from arranging Temüjin's future marriage. Yesugei's sudden death left young Temüjin and his family in a perilous position. In Mongol custom, leadership didn't automatically pass to a small boy, so their own tribe betrayed them. In a cruel twist, Temüjin's clan abandoned the boy, his mother, and 6 siblings, leaving them alone on the harsh steppe rather than feed another family's children. The boy who would one day command millions was suddenly an outcast, struggling just to survive. Those early years were a daily fight for life. The family lived in extreme poverty, surviving on wild fruits, roots, and small game that Temüjin and his brothers could hunt or scavenge. The hunger and desperation bred tension even within the family. At one point, teenage Temüjin got into a dispute with his older half-brother Better, over food and authority. The conflict ended in a shocking act. Temüjin killed his half-brother to prevent him from taking control of the family and monopolizing the meager resources. This grim incident, a taboo act of fratricide, underscored the brutal choices the young Temüjin was willing to make to ensure his family's survival and his own leadership. It was an early sign of his ruthless determination. Word of Temüjin's toughness and charisma began to spread. Despite being abandoned, he gradually attracted a few loyal companions. However, his hardships weren't over. His former clan, the Taichiud, eventually captured Temüjin and enslaved him, treating the upstart youth as a threat. For a time, he was a prisoner with a wooden collar around his neck, a far cry from the mighty Khan he would become. But Temüjin's will was indomitable. He escaped his captors in a daring bid for freedom. A local family, moved by his plight, hid him from the pursuing guards at great personal risk. With courage and a bit of luck, Temüjin slipped away into the night. This would not be the last time he escaped a seemingly hopeless situation. Every trial he endured only steeled his resolve and taught him lessons in trust, betrayal, and survival that would guide him later in life. By his late teens, Temüjin had proven himself a natural leader who could inspire loyalty. One by one, allies appeared in his life like fate. He reunited with a childhood friend, Jamukha, who became his Anda, blood brother, in a traditional oath of loyalty. He also gained a staunch comrade named Bo Orchu after recovering some stolen horses. Boorchu was so impressed by Temujin's character that he joined him as one of his first followers. These early friendships and alliances formed the seed of an army. Temujin was still just a young man, but he was gathering the human building blocks of power, people who believed in him. In these lean years, he learned how to earn trust, reward loyalty, and use his personal charisma to bind followers to him, no matter the odds. Those qualities would prove essential in the trials to come. Amid the turbulence of Temujin's youth, there was one bright spot of hope and stability: Berta, his young wife. Years earlier, Temujin's father had arranged a marriage between Temujin and Berta of the Ongurut tribe to cement an alliance. After Yesugei's death, Temujin still honored this arrangement. At around age 16, he traveled to claim his bride, and Berta became his wife. Their union was more than just personal. It was a political lifeline. Berta's family provided a valuable alliance, and her presence gave Temujin a trusted partner who would remain by his side through every triumph and tragedy. In fact, Berta would become his closest advisor and the mother of his 4 sons, playing a crucial role in the Mongol Empire's future. Not long after their marriage, a dire crisis tested Temujin's budding family and his ability to protect his own. The Merkit tribe, old enemies of Temujin's family, raided Temujin's camp in the dark of night, seeking vengeance. Temujin's father had kidnapped Hoelun, Temujin's mother, from a Merkit man years before, so this was blood revenge. In the chaos of the raid, Temujin and his brothers managed to escape by galloping into the wilderness. But Berta was captured by the Merkit warriors. Temujin faced a heartbreaking loss. His wife, who might have been carrying his first child, was now a prisoner likely to be forced into marriage with a Merkit man. This was a personal catastrophe and a blow to his honor. Temujin's determination hardened. He would not lose Berta. With his small band of followers, Temujin knew he needed help to rescue Berta. Swallowing any pride, he turned to the 2 most powerful allies he could find, Togrul Khan and Jamukha. Togrul, also known as Wang Khan, was the ruler of the Karait tribe and an old friend of Temujin's father. Temujin had earlier won Togrul's favor by presenting him with a precious sable fur coat, a bold gift from a young man to a Khan. Togrul was so impressed that he treated Temujin like an adopted son, a fortuitous alliance for the young leader. Jamukha, Temujin's sworn brother, also commanded a following of his own. In 1178, these 3 men, Temujin, Jamukha, and Togrul, joined forces to wage war on the Merkit and save Berta. The campaign was swift and successful. Temujin and his allies attacked the Merkit camp in a surprise assault, catching them off guard. In the fighting, the Merkits were defeated and scattered. Berta was found and dramatically rescued from her captors. One can only imagine Temujin's relief and joy as he lifted his wife onto his horse, restoring her to his family. This victory was more than just a personal rescue mission. It was Temujin's first major military triumph, one with clever alliance building and courage. It cemented his reputation as a rising power on the steppe. However, even this joyous reunion carried a touch of uncertainty. During Berta's time in captivity, she became pregnant. In 1180, she gave birth to a son named Yoki. Temujin accepted the boy as his own, but the question of Yochi's true paternity would linger quietly, causing tension in later years among Temujin's children. For now, though, family and unity mattered more than blood. Temujin's family was intact and growing. He had proven he could lead warriors into battle and emerge victorious. His star was on the rise, and more warriors flocked to join him, inspired by the rescue of Berta and Temujin's evident leadership. Yet, success bred new challenges. Temujin's relationship with Jamukha, his close friend and ally, began to fray after their joint victory over the Merkit. According to chronicles, the 2 brothers in arms camped together following the raid, but a trivial disagreement sparked a rift. Some say Jamukha made an offhand comment about the way they had camped, or the leadership structure, which Temüjin took as an insult. Beneath this small incident lay a deeper truth. Jamukha was an aristocrat by birth and cherished traditional Mongol noble customs, while Temüjin was an upstart from a low clan who favored merit over aristocracy. Their visions for the future diverged. Before long, the two friends decided to part ways, splitting their followers between them. The childhood friends who swore eternal brotherhood were now destined to become rivals. This painful split set the stage for an epic rivalry that would dominate Temüjin's next decade. Jamukha, once a beloved brother, would soon become Temüjin's most formidable enemy on the path to Mongol unity. Their fractured friendship added an emotional weight to the battles that followed, a personal tragedy entwined with political ambition. As we shall see, Temüjin's road to power would force him to confront and overcome the very man who had once fought by his side. The flames of destiny were being stoked, and the Mongolian steppe braced for a clash of titans. The rupture with Jamukha ushered in a time of chaos and civil war among the Mongol tribes. On one side stood Temüjin, a leader with a vision to break the old order and unite the tribes under one banner. On the other side stood Jamukha, a noble-born prince of the steppe who championed the traditional aristocracy, and now saw Temüjin as a threat to the old ways. Both men began gathering allies for the struggle ahead, and soon all of Mongolia was polarized. Friendships were tested, families split, and every tribe chose sides in what was becoming a war for the soul of the steppe. Jamukha struck first. In 1187, at a place called Dalan Baljut, Jamukha's forces met Temüjin's smaller army. Temüjin fought fiercely, but he was badly defeated in this early battle. The loss was devastating. Many of Temüjin's men were captured, and Jamukha, who had once exchanged boyhood gifts with Temüjin, showed no mercy to those captives. In a gruesome display meant to terrorize his enemies, Jamukha had 70 of Temüjin's captured warriors boiled alive in cauldrons. The sight and stench of this atrocity seared itself into the Mongols' memory. Jamukha even mutilated the bodies of rival chieftains, shaming their corpses as a warning. This extreme cruelty shocked many onlookers. It was one thing to win a battle, but Jamukha's brutality crossed a line of Mongol honor. Instead of breaking Temüjin's support, it began to erode Jamukha's. Several tribes were horrified. They took their warriors and defected to Temüjin's side, reasoning that Temüjin, despite his defeat, was a more just and honorable leader than Jamukha the merciless. Temüjin, for his part, learned from this defeat. He licked his wounds, regrouped, and adapted. Some accounts suggest that after 1187, Temüjin spent a period as a fugitive, or even as a vassal to the powerful Jin Empire of North China, who controlled part of Mongolia at the time. The Jin had an interest in keeping the steppe divided, and at times they alternated support between Temüjin and his rivals to maintain a balance of power. Whether as a minor Jin tributary or an underdog in the wild, Temüjin took these years to rebuild his strength and reputation. Bit by bit, he gathered more warriors, emphasizing discipline and loyalty. He showed that he rewarded those who stood by him. He also did something revolutionary. Temüjin promoted people for their abilities and loyalty, not just because of noble birth. This gave common soldiers a reason to rally behind him. Under Temüjin, even a low-born warrior could rise to greatness. By the mid-1190s, Temüjin was ready to challenge Jamukha again. The Mongol world had splintered into factions, and Temüjin displayed a genius for forming alliances to chip away at his foes. He renewed his alliance with his father's old friend Togrul, the Karaite Khan, by helping Togrul regain his throne from internal rivals. In 1196, Temüjin even cooperated with the Chinese Jin dynasty in a joint campaign against the Tatars, one of the tribes allied with Jamukha, earning himself a minor title from the Jin court for his service. Each political move increased Temüjin's clout. Although ostensibly Togrul's subordinate, Temüjin was emerging as an independent power broker on the steppe. Temüjin's revenge against the Tatars came around 1202. The Tatar tribe had been responsible for poisoning his father years ago, and Temüjin had neither forgiven nor forgotten. He defeated the Tatar forces in battle and then exacted a ruthless vengeance. He executed every Tatar leader and warrior who had opposed him. Mongol tradition holds that he ordered the execution of all Tatar males above a certain height, said to be the height of a cart axle, effectively wiping out the adult Tatar men and ending the tribe's threat forever. While brutal, this act eliminated one of his fiercest enemies and sent a message to all other tribes. Opposing Temüjin could mean utter destruction. He spared the Tatar women and young children, absorbing them into his own tribe, and even took some talented warriors like Jebe, a young Tatar archer who had impressed Temüjin with his bravery, into his service. Temüjin was not just destroying enemies, he was also building an army. From the remnants, always on the lookout for skilled people he could incorporate into his growing Mongol nation, by 1203, the balance of power had shifted. Only 3 major forces remained on the Mongolian steppe: Temüjin's Mongols in the east, Togrul's Karaite tribe in the center, and the Naiman tribe in the west. Jamukha, still smarting from his earlier cruelties backfiring, sought refuge and support with these remaining powers, especially with Togrul and the Naimans. Temüjin, understanding the value of alliances through marriage, proposed a peace. He suggested that his first son Jochi marry Togrul's daughter, binding their families together. It was a canny move, perhaps too canny. Togrul's son, Sengum, grew alarmed, interpreting Temüjin's offer as a ploy to eventually usurp the Karaite. Jamukha fueled these fears, whispering that Temüjin's rise was a threat to all aristocrats, and that his meritocratic ways would overturn the old, noble privileges. The Karaite court turned against Temüjin. Ultimately, Togrul betrayed his adopted son. He lured Temüjin into coming for a feast, planning to assassinate him in an ambush. At the last minute, 2 herdsmen loyal to Temüjin discovered the plot and warned him. Temüjin quickly led his army away before the trap could close, but Togrul and Jamukha pursued him. A fierce battle erupted at a place called Kalakaljid Sands in 1203. Temüjin was badly outnumbered and suffered a severe defeat there. This was perhaps the lowest point in Temüjin's quest. Defeated by his former patron and his one-time brother, scattered and on the run. Many of his men were killed, and even his own family was in danger. It seemed that Temüjin's ambitions might be extinguished, but heroes are often forged in the crucible of despair. Temüjin did not give up. He retreated to a remote lake called Baljuna with just a handful of loyal followers, those who remained true when all seemed lost. There, starving and desperate, Temüjin made a sacred covenant with his surviving companions. According to Mongol histories, he took muddy water from the lake and vowed with tears that if they stood by him, he would reward them richly once victory was achieved. He promised, "If I succeed in my great work, I shall share the sweet and the bitter with you," pledging eternal loyalty to those who stayed at his side. This Baljuna covenant became legendary, a moment of profound unity among men of different tribes and religions who were bound only by their trust in Temüjin. The men were moved to tears by Temüjin's words, and their loyalty only hardened. Out of defeat, a core of unshakably loyal followers was born, the nucleus of a new Mongol nation. These were not all blood relatives or aristocrats. They were a band of brothers from various origins, united by oath rather than lineage. Temüjin's ability to inspire devotion in adversity was perhaps his greatest talent. Rejuvenated, Temüjin went back on the offensive. He gathered allies who still believed in him and struck back at Togrul. In a clever ruse, Temüjin set a trap of his own, staging an ambush that turned the tables on the Karaite army. The climactic battle of the Jejer Heights raged for 3 days, but in the end, Temüjin won a decisive victory over Togrul. Togrul and his son Sengum fled for their lives. Sengum escaped to distant lands, but Togrul was killed by a Naiman scout who mistook the old Khan for just another fleeing soldier. Thus ended the life of Togrul, the man who had been like a father to Temüjin before treachery severed their bond. Temüjin absorbed the defeated Karat tribe into his own following. He even took Togrul's own daughter, Ibaka, as a wife, and married another of Togrul's relatives to his son Tolui, to solidify the integration. In one stroke, Temüjin eliminated a rival and increased his strength with the manpower and resources of the Karat. Now only the western tribes remained, the Naimans, who had given refuge to Jamukha and other enemies of Temüjin. In 1204, Temüjin marched west to face the Naiman Confederation in what would be the final showdown for Mongol supremacy. The Naiman leader, Taiyang Khan, brought a large force bolstered by remnants of tribes Temüjin had defeated. Jamukha was among them as an advisor. The armies clashed in the Battle of Chakirmaut in the Altai Mountains. It was a brutal fight, but Temüjin's seasoned warriors and brilliant tactics prevailed. The Naiman army was shattered. Taiyang Khan was killed on the field, and his son Kuchlug fled for his life, escaping far to the west. He would later cause trouble in a distant kingdom, as we'll see. With the Naimans defeated, Temüjin's forces hunted down any remaining pockets of resistance. The Merkit tribe, which had allied with the Naimans, was also decisively crushed that same year, settling the score from the kidnapping of Berta once and for all. In the aftermath of this victory, a final dramatic episode closed the chapter on Temüjin's civil wars. Jamukha's fate. The once great Jamukha, whose coalition had now collapsed, was on the run with a few followers. Sensing the winds had irreversibly shifted, Jamukha's own men betrayed him. They delivered Jamukha to Temüjin in hopes of mercy or reward. Temüjin, who had loved Jamukha like a brother in his youth, is said to have been anguished at seeing his old friend in chains. He reportedly offered Jamukha forgiveness and a chance to join him again, but Jamukha refused. In the secret history of the Mongols, Jamukha instead asked Temüjin for a noble death, to die without the spilling of blood, as befitting an aristocrat. Temüjin honored this request. He executed Jamukha, perhaps by breaking his back or another swift method, thus ending Jamukha's life honorably, albeit tragically, at the hands of his friend. Other accounts suggest Jamukha might have been torn apart, but the version with an honorable death is the one Mongol storytellers favored, highlighting the bittersweet respect between the two former friends. Temüjin also punished the men who betrayed Jamukha, executing them for their disloyalty, a signal that treachery was not to be rewarded, even if it benefited him. With Jamukha gone, every major rival to Temüjin had been eliminated. It was an extraordinary turn of events. The boy who had been orphaned and abandoned now stood as the undisputed master of the Mongolian steppe. Tribe by tribe, through battle, diplomacy, and sheer force of personality, Temüjin had united or subjugated the fractious Mongol clans. He had climbed from the lowest depths of desperation to the pinnacle of power. This journey was anything but easy. It was soaked in blood and marred by personal heartbreak, yet also marked by innovative leadership and unwavering vision. Temüjin demonstrated an uncanny ability to learn from defeat, inspire loyalty, and adapt his strategies. In just over 20 years, he transformed a collection of warring nomadic tribes into a nascent nation bound under his leadership. The stage was now set for a new chapter in Mongol history, one that would soon reverberate far beyond the grasslands of Asia. The year 1206 is a monumental milestone, the dawn of a new empire. With all enemies vanquished, Temüjin called a great assembly, known as a Kurultai, of all Mongol chieftains and nobility. It was time to formalize the unification and chart the future. At the banks of the Onon River, Mongol leaders gathered to proclaim Temüjin as their supreme leader. In a ceremonial moment, heavy with historical significance, Temüjin accepted a new title, Genghis Khan, rendered in the West as Genghis Khan, often interpreted to mean universal ruler or oceanic ruler, signifying the breadth of his power. The exact meaning can be debated, but what mattered is that Genghis Khan now stood as the sovereign of all Mongols. A nation was born that day, the Mongol nation, roughly the size of modern Mongolia in territory at first, but with ambitions that would soon extend far beyond. For the Mongols, who had never before been united under a single banner, this was a revolutionary transformation. Genghis Khan wasted no time in organizing his new empire for longevity and strength. The charismatic warrior now showed his skill as a statesman and lawgiver. One of his first priorities was to eliminate the old feudal tribal divisions that had caused so much infighting. Genghis Khan declared that loyalty to the Mongol state and its Khan must supersede loyalty to one's tribe or family. To enforce this, he famously restructured the army and society. Warriors from different tribes were mixed together in units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, the Arban, Zun, Mingan, and Tumen, a system that broke old tribal bonds and created a new Mongol identity. Each unit had commanders appointed not by noble lineage, but by merit and proven loyalty to Genghis Khan. By going against custom and putting competent allies rather than relatives in key positions, Genghis built a chain of command based on talent and trust. This was essentially a meritocracy, unheard of among the aristocratic tribes, and it greatly increased the efficiency and unity of his forces. Genghis Khan also implemented a strict discipline to curb the chaos that often followed nomadic warfare. For instance, he ordered that no looting would occur until a battle was completely won. This prevented warriors from breaking ranks to seize booty too early and ensured battles were fought to decisive conclusions. It also made conquered populations easier to manage since wanton destruction, beyond what was militarily necessary, was discouraged at least until organized victory. Fair distribution of spoils was done after victory, which kept his troops satisfied and loyal. These innovations showed Genghis Khan's knack for organizing and motivating his people in novel ways. Beyond military matters, Genghis Khan introduced a code of law known as the Yasa. Though it was kept secret, its principles were enforced. He tackled social issues that had long plagued the steppe. He abolished inherited aristocratic titles, effectively leveling the playing field among Mongols, so that only loyalty and achievement mattered. He forbade the selling of women, a groundbreaking reform in a society where women had often been treated as chattel or prizes of war. This increased the security and standing of women within Mongol society. He banned the enslavement of any Mongol, decreeing that no Mongol could be another Mongol's slave. This fostered a sense of brotherhood among his people. He also made livestock theft punishable by death, a harsh but effective deterrent in a pastoral culture where stealing someone's animals could mean dooming their family to starvation. Furthermore, Genghis Khan took steps to build an administration for his growing state. He adopted a writing system for the Mongolian language, borrowing and modifying the Uyghur script, so that decrees and laws could be recorded. He conducted a regular census of his people to better organize taxation and military conscription. Understanding the importance of diplomacy and trade, he granted diplomatic immunity to foreign ambassadors and envoys, a practice to encourage open communications, and one he would later enforce with a vengeance, as we'll see. And in an era often marked by religious strife, Genghis Khan was notably tolerant of different religions. He himself was an animist shamanist, but his followers included Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and others, all of whom were allowed to practice freely without persecution. He declared freedom of religion across his empire, an enlightened stance well before such ideas caught on elsewhere in the world. In these ways, Genghis Khan was not just a conqueror, but a nation builder. The Mongols, who had once only known petty clan loyalties, were now united by common laws, a common identity, and a loyalty to the Great Khan. He transformed the Mongol society from a loose collection of tribes into a more centralized, military feudal state with a clear hierarchy and legal order. These reforms strengthened the Mongols for the challenges ahead. As one historian noted, by 1206, Genghis Khan ruled over roughly 1 million people across Mongolia, a small population compared to the mighty civilizations around them. But with his leadership, they would punch far above their weight. With the homeland secured and organized, Genghis Khan now turned his gaze outward. The great conqueror's appetite had been whetted, and the Mongol people, once content to fight among themselves, were now a loaded bowstring ready to launch at the wider world. In Genghis Khan's mind, it is said, Tengri, the eternal blue sky, the Mongols' chief deity, had destined him to rule all under heaven. The Mongol Empire's birth was only the beginning. The real conquests were about to begin. As Genghis Khan set his sights beyond Mongolia, the rest of the world had no idea what was coming. The newly united Mongol nation found itself bordered by powerful kingdoms that had long regarded the steppe nomads as pesky neighbors. To the southeast lay the Jin dynasty of northern China, a rich, civilized empire of cities, agriculture, and millions of subjects. To the southwest was the Western Xia, kingdom of the Tangut people, a smaller but still formidable state controlling valuable trade routes and oases along the Silk Road. These sedentary kingdoms likely assumed that the Mongols, like previous nomadic confederations, would be content with occasional raids or would eventually fragment. They were wrong. Genghis Khan had far grander plans. He was determined to secure his borders and acquire the wealth of these lands to strengthen his empire. Additionally, the steppe nomads had long-standing grievances. The Jin had interfered in Mongol politics for decades, and the Tanguts had at times demanded tribute from the Mongols. Now, Genghis Khan sought payback and plunder. Western Xia, Tangut Campaign, 1209. Genghis Khan's first foreign campaign came against the Western Xia, known to the Mongols as the Tangut Kingdom. In 1207, even before the formal Kurultai, Mongol forces began probing raids into Xia territory. By 1209, Genghis launched a full-scale invasion of Western Xia, leading his armies across the Gobi Desert toward the Tangut cities. The Tanguts had strong fortified cities and presumed the desert would shield them, but the Mongols were used to harsh terrains. Unlike traditional armies, the Mongols traveled light and swift, unburdened by slow supply wagons. Each Mongol rider had a small string of horses for remounts, and they lived off the land or carried dried meat and curd in pouches. This gave them incredible mobility. The Mongols besieged the fortress city of Yinchuan, the Western Xia capital. Here, Genghis Khan demonstrated both creativity and the hallmark Mongol tactic of the feigned retreat. At one point, the Mongols appeared to withdraw from the city as if giving up, luring the Tangut forces into a premature chase. Then the Mongols wheeled around and counterattacked ferociously, a classic trick that sowed confusion. Genghis also attempted an unusual engineering feat. He tried to flood the city by diverting a nearby river, hoping to swamp Yinchuan's defenses. This plan failed. The waters did not breach the walls, but instead caused a messy flood in the Mongol camp. Still, the psychological impact of Genghis's relentless pressure was devastating to the Tanguts. Ultimately, the Western Xia ruler lost his nerve and surrendered to the Mongols. By 1210, the Tangut king agreed to become a vassal, offering tribute, including camels, falcons, and textiles, and a princess in marriage to Genghis Khan. Genghis had conquered his first kingdom beyond Mongolia. He did not annihilate Western Xia immediately. He left the Tangut king on his throne as a subordinate, but this victory gave the Mongols a taste of siege warfare and the riches of Chinese civilization. It would not be the last encounter with Western Xia. We will revisit them in Genghis's final campaign, but for now, the Mongols had secured their southwestern flank. Jin Dynasty Campaign 1211 to 1215. The next target was far mightier, the Jin Empire. The Jurchen-led Jin Dynasty controlled northern China, including what is now Beijing. They were populous and wealthy, a tempting prize for a conqueror, but also militarily strong, with massive armies and fortified cities. Initially, Genghis Khan's casus belli, cause for war, came somewhat diplomatically. The Jin Emperor Wei Xiaowang had demanded Genghis Khan's submission as a vassal, presuming the new Mongol power would pay obeisance to its big neighbor. After all, previous Mongol chiefs had acknowledged Jin overlordship in exchange for gifts or trade. But Genghis Khan was no ordinary tribal chief. He proudly refused, and that insult, combined with the Jin's prior meddling in steppe affairs, made war inevitable. In 1211, Genghis Khan led an estimated 100,000 to 150,000 Mongol horsemen through the Great Wall passes into Jin territory. The Jin, confident in their superiority, marshaled reportedly hundreds of thousands of troops to stop him, but the Mongols quickly proved that mobility and tactics can beat sheer numbers. Genghis employed brilliant battlefield maneuvers like feigned retreats, encirclements, and hit-and-run archery attacks that frustrated the slower Jin infantry and heavy cavalry. One by one, the Mongols won pitched battles against larger Jin forces, such as at Huanerzui, the Badger's Mouth Pass, and Yahuling, Wild Fox Ridge, annihilating Jin armies through strategic genius and perhaps a bit of luck. After these defeats, the Mongols swarmed into the rich North China plain. Instead of attacking every fortified city head-on, which could be costly, the Mongols employed a scorched earth strategy. They bypassed some walled cities, choosing instead to ravage the countryside and destroy the Jin Empire's food supply. Mongol riders swept across farms and villages, driving terrified refugees toward the big cities. Soon, waves of refugees flooded into the Jin capital and other citadels, causing havoc. The Jin government, overwhelmed by mouths to feed, began to collapse from within. Food shortages grew dire, and in desperation, Jin commanders massacred tens of thousands of their own peasants, people they felt they could no longer feed, or who they feared might aid the Mongols from inside. This cruelty only worsened their plight, destroying the morale and legitimacy of the Jin leadership. By 1213 to 1214, the Mongols had isolated the grand Jin capital, Zhongdu, which stood where Beijing stands today. Genghis Khan laid siege to Zhongdu in 1214. Lacking experience with large sieges, the Mongols recruited Chinese engineers and siege experts among their prisoners to help build catapults and siege towers. The siege wore on, and famine and disease ran rampant inside the city. Finally, the Jin emperor sued for peace in 1214. To get the Mongols to withdraw, he agreed to a huge ransom. Thousands of pounds of silk, gold, silver, and even a supply of horses were handed over to the Mongols. Genghis Khan, satisfied for the moment, withdrew his main forces with this bounty. However, it was a temporary reprieve for the Jin. Shortly after, the Jin court made a fateful miscalculation. The Jin emperor decided to move his capital south from embattled Zhongdu to the city of Kaifeng, thinking he could regroup in the south out of the Mongols' easy reach. To Genghis Khan, this was a betrayal of their agreement. The Mongols saw it as the Jin breaking faith after paying tribute, and it also signaled weakness. Enraged and opportunistic, Genghis returned in 1215 and stormed Zhongdu in a renewed assault. The city, already weakened, fell to the Mongols. What followed was mass slaughter and destruction. Zhongdu was sacked thoroughly, swept off the earth, in the words of one chronicler. According to accounts, the Mongols' wrath was such that piles of bones were left where a thriving capital once stood. Fires turned the sky black. It was a catastrophic end for what had been one of the world's great cities. In later generations, Beijing would rise again on this site, but Zhongdu, as it was known, was no more. The fall of Zhongdu effectively marked the collapse of Jin power in the north. The Jin emperor and court still lived, having fled to the south, and the Jin dynasty limped on in southern China for nearly 2 decades more. But Genghis Khan did not pursue them further at that time. His horses had already carried him farther than he'd ever been from home, and he had other matters to attend to in the west. Before departing North China, Genghis appointed Mongol governors and supervisors over the newly conquered territories, and left a detachment to continue harassing the Jin. Northern China was now largely under Mongol control or influence, a stunning achievement for steppe nomads who had no previous history of siege warfare. The conquest of the Jin lands brought Genghis Khan immense wealth, stores of grain to feed his people, gold and luxury goods to reward his generals, and skilled artisans and engineers who were captured and sent back to Mongolia. Rather than destroy all the spoils of cities, the Mongols selectively spared engineers, craftsmen, and artisans, using their talents to further Mongol ambitions. This pragmatic approach would be a hallmark of the empire. Destruction was wrought when needed, but talent and technology were eagerly absorbed. By 1215, the Mongol Empire now encompassed Mongolia, the former Western Xia as a vassal, and a huge swath of northern China including the rich Yellow River Basin and the former Jin capital region. The Mongols had reached the doorstep of the Song dynasty, which ruled southern China, and had a foothold in the cradle of Chinese civilization. Yet, unbelievably, Genghis Khan's appetite only grew after tasting victory in China. His gaze turned westward to the vast Islamic lands of Central Asia and beyond. Even as he campaigned against the Jin, Genghis Khan had been keeping an eye on the lands to the west. Across the Tian Shan mountains and deserts lay the Khwarezmian Empire, a sprawling Muslim state that included much of Central Asia, Persia, Iran, and Afghanistan. It was ruled by Shah Ala al-Din Muhammad II, a proud and somewhat impulsive monarch. The Khwarezm Empire was rich from controlling Silk Road trade cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Urgench, legendary centers of commerce and culture. To Genghis, fresh from conquering northern China, these cities represented both an opportunity for trade and a potential threat if their ruler became hostile. Initially, Genghis Khan sought a peaceful relationship with Khwarezm. He envisioned commerce flowing along the Silk Road under Mongol and Khwarezmian cooperation. In 1218, he sent a trade caravan of merchants to the Khwarezmian city of Otrar, laden with precious goods, and later he sent ambassadors to the Shah proposing friendship and trade. This is where things went disastrously wrong. The Shah of Khwarezm, perhaps underestimating the Mongols, or suspecting the caravan was a spy mission, betrayed Genghis Khan's trust. The governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, seized the caravan, accusing them of being spies, and he executed the merchants while confiscating the goods. When Genghis Khan learned of this atrocity, he was furious but restrained. He sent a delegation of 3 ambassadors to the Shah himself, demanding redress and the punishment of the greedy governor. In a staggering display of arrogance and folly, Shah Muhammad II executed one of Genghis Khan's envoys and humiliated the others by shaving off their beards. To the Mongols, who held sacred the protection of envoys, this was an unforgivable outrage. Genghis Khan's response was chillingly decisive. "You have chosen war," he effectively declared. In 1219, Genghis Khan rallied his armies, some 100,000 to 150,000 Mongol warriors, and marched westwards to exact vengeance on the Khwarezmian Empire. The speed and ferocity of the Mongol assault stunned the Islamic world. The Mongols advanced in multiple columns, crossing mountains and deserts that the Khwarezmians thought impassable. Genghis, in a strategic masterstroke, divided his forces into 3 main armies to attack along different routes, confusing the Shah as to their main objective. The cities of the Khwarezm Empire, though walled and defended by sizable garrisons, were unprepared for the relentless Mongol siege tactics and psychological warfare. One of the first major clashes was the siege of Otrar, where the fiasco had begun. Otrar was stubbornly defended for months, but eventually fell. Its governor, Inalchuk, who started the whole mess, was captured. In Mongol tradition, no mercy was given. Legend says Inalchuk was executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a symbolic punishment for his greed and deafness to diplomacy. Whether or not that exact detail is true, it illustrates the point. Genghis Khan's revenge was absolute. Next, Genghis's armies converged on the jewel of Central Asia, Bukhara. In February 1220, the Mongols arrived at the gates of Bukhara, which was filled with refugees who had fled the oncoming storm. The city's defenders, in panic, abandoned the citadel at night and tried to escape, only to be slaughtered outside the walls. Bukhara surrendered, and what followed is one of the most famous episodes in Mongol lore. Genghis Khan entered the city with a small escort and took up residence in the emir's palace. He gathered the city's notables in the Great Mosque. Standing before them, a conqueror in humble felt robes, he reportedly gave a speech chastising them for their sins and folly in resisting him. "I am the punishment of God," he is often quoted as saying. "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Whether or not those exact words were spoken, the message was clear. Bukhara was at his mercy. The Mongols looted the city's treasures, conscripted some 30,000 citizens, including artisans and 500 skilled individuals, to serve their war effort, and set Bukhara's great library and buildings ablaze. The city was left in a desolation of smoke and ash, according to witnesses. From Bukhara, Genghis rode to Samarkand, the capital of the Khwarezmian Empire. Samarkand boasted strong walls and tens of thousands of soldiers, including elite Turkic warriors and war elephants. But the Mongols executed a brilliant plan. They staged a false retreat to draw out Samarkand's cavalry, then ambushed and destroyed them outside the city. With the field army broken, Samarkand's remaining garrison lost heart. By 1220, after a short siege, Samarkand surrendered. Genghis Khan did spare some lives in Samarkand. Notably, he often set aside skilled artisans, scholars, and craftsmen, and sent them back to Mongolia or other parts of his empire. But many of the defeated soldiers and resisting citizens were massacred to serve as a gruesome example. City after city fell in the Khwarezmian domain. Urgench, the beautiful capital of Khwarezm, in present-day Turkmenistan, put up a fierce resistance and cost the Mongols heavy losses in brutal street-to-street fighting. Enraged, the Mongols exacted one of their most horrific punishments there. After taking Urgench, they slaughtered a vast number of its inhabitants. Some chronicles say the Mongols ordered each soldier to execute a certain quota of people, which resulted in hundreds of thousands killed, though figures in medieval sources are often exaggerations. Nishapur, another major city, fell after a siege in which Genghis's son-in-law was killed by an arrow. In retaliation, Nishapur's entire population was reportedly put to death and the city razed, with even dogs and cats not spared. A legendary account, perhaps, but it paints the fury of the Mongols when angered. Herat, Merv, Balkh, the illustrious cities of Persia and Khorasan, each met a similar fate, surrendering or falling one by one. The Mongols would often use unskilled captives as human shields or cannon fodder in assaults on the next city, driving terrified prisoners in front of them to absorb enemy arrows or fill moats. It was psychological warfare at its most ruthless. Each new city heard what happened to the last, spreading terror ahead of the Mongol advance. No one knows with any certainty how many people died during Genghis Khan's wars, writes one historian. Modern estimates suggest millions perished in the Khwarezmian campaign alone, through war and the famine and disease that followed. The Mongols propagated their vicious image deliberately, using fear as a weapon so that some cities might surrender without a fight. Genghis Khan understood that a reputation for mercilessness could sometimes save lives in the long run. if towns capitulated immediately, they would be spared typical destruction and only be looted, whereas protracted resistance led to annihilation. It was a brutal calculus that many Central Asian cities learned too late. While Genghis devastated the heart of the Khwarezm Empire, the Shah himself, Muhammad II, fled in panic. Chased by the Mongols, the once proud ruler ran from one city to another, never staying long. Genghis dispatched his top generals, Jebe and Subutai, with a contingent of horsemen on a legendary pursuit of the Shah. The Shah fled across the deserts to an island in the Caspian Sea, where he died in early 1221, exhausted and humiliated. Some say of pleurisy or pneumonia, essentially dying in exile. Genghis Khan had effectively toppled the Khwarezmian state. The Shah's courageous 20-year-old son, Jalal al-Din Mingburnu, however, was not so easily subdued. Jalal al-Din rallied some remnants of the Khwarezmian forces and continued resistance in Afghanistan and what is now Pakistan. He even inflicted a rare defeat on a Mongol force at the Battle of Parwan in 1221, a glimmer of hope that Mongols could be beaten. Genghis Khan himself took notice and moved to deal with this lion cub of Khwarezm. In November 1221, Genghis's army cornered Jalal al-Din by the Indus River. In the Battle of the Indus, the Mongols won a crushing victory and slaughtered most of Jalal al-Din's remaining troops. In an iconic moment often recounted in chronicles, Jalal al-Din, rather than surrender, spurred his horse and leapt into the raging Indus River. He and a few followers miraculously made it across to the Indian side and escaped. Watching this from the riverbank, Genghis Khan reportedly admired Jalal al-Din's fearless escape. He even held back his archers from shooting the young prince, perhaps out of respect for such bold bravery. "Such a son must a father have," Genghis is quoted saying of the youth's display of courage. Jalal al-Din survived to fight another day. He would trouble the Mongols again in Persia later, before eventually being assassinated years after Genghis's death. But for now, the Khwarezmian resistance was effectively shattered. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan's generals Jebe and Subutai were not content just chasing the Shah. With the Shah dead, these two brilliant commanders took a bold detour. They continued marching west on an extended reconnaissance raid, possibly the most audacious scouting mission in history. They led about 20,000 Mongol horsemen across the Caucasus Mountains into the Georgian and Azeri lands, defeating a Georgian army that tried to block them. They then swept onto the steppes of the Kipchak Kumans north of the Black Sea. The Kipchaks were an allied nomadic people, some of whom appealed to their trading partners, the Kievan Rus' princes of Eastern Europe, for help against this Mongol incursion. In 1223, at the Battle of the Kalka River in modern Ukraine, a coalition of Rus' princes and Kipchak warriors confronted Subutai and Jebe. The result was a disaster for the Rus and Kipchaks. The Mongols, using feigned retreats and fast flanking maneuvers, routed the larger Rus' force, slaughtering many of the Rus' nobility. It was the first major encounter between Mongols and European armies, and it ended in a Mongol victory that sent shockwaves through Eastern Europe. However, after this, Subutai and Jebe did not press further into Europe at that time. They had been ranging far from the main Mongol host for years. Jebe may have been wounded or fallen ill and actually died on the return journey. Sources differ. Subutai returned to rejoin Genghis Khan's camp by 1225, having completed an epic loop around the Caspian, effectively mapping the Western world's defenses for future invasions. By 1223, the Mongols had conquered an empire stretching from the Yellow Sea to the Caspian Sea. Genghis Khan personally had led campaigns from the Pacific coast of China to the western reaches of Central Asia. In roughly 5 years of campaigning in the West, his armies had obliterated what had been one of the most powerful Muslim states and even tested the fringes of Europe. It was an unprecedented explosion of conquest, the likes of which the world had rarely seen. And yet, Even after all that, Genghis Khan was not finished. One corner of his domain had risen in rebellion during his absence, and he was determined to make an example of them before he could rest. After years of warfare in Central Asia, Genghis Khan and his victorious hordes began the long ride back to Mongolia in 1225. They returned laden with spoils, treasures, livestock, captives, and new knowledge. By now, Genghis Khan controlled the largest contiguous territory of anyone on Earth, from the Sea of Japan to the Caspian Sea. One might think the great Khan would be content to enjoy his triumphs in his homeland. But as he arrived back on the Mongolian steppe, news came that Western Xia, the Tangut kingdom he had subjugated earlier, had broken its vows. The Tangut king had refused to send troops to aid Genghis Khan's Khwarezm campaign, despite being a vassal, and was now in open defiance, perhaps hoping the Mongols were weakened or too stretched to retaliate. This defiance was the ultimate insult to Genghis Khan. One does not betray the Khan and live. Despite being in his 60s, Genghis Khan once more gathered his forces for one last punitive expedition. In 1226, the Mongols marched again into the lands of Western Xia, intent on utterly crushing the Tanguts. This campaign took on a grim, vengeful character. Having been betrayed, Genghis Khan seemed determined to wipe Western Xia off the map. Mongol armies systematically reduced city after city. They massacred populations, destroyed irrigation systems, and sought to erase the Tangut culture. Legend has it that Genghis Khan vowed to annihilate the Tangut so completely that even their name would cease to exist. True to this threat, the Western Xia kingdom was virtually obliterated in the coming year. During the campaign, in early 1227, Genghis Khan faced what would be his final battle, not against an army, but against his own mortality. Accounts differ on what happened. One story is that while hunting or during a minor skirmish, Genghis Khan was thrown from his horse, a heavy fall causing internal injuries that never fully healed. Another version suggests he fell ill, possibly with a fever. Some speculate malaria or typhoid, given the region's climate. There are also more colorful legends. One Chinese account claims he was wounded in battle, and another, persistent but likely apocryphal tale from much later alleges he was killed by a captured Tangut princess in revenge. However, the best evidence points to either a riding accident injury or an illness as the cause. What's remarkable is that even injured and sick, Genghis Khan refused to halt his campaign. His army pressed on, and he with it, bent on seeing Western Xia's end. The Tangut capital, Zhongxing near modern Yinchuan, fell under siege. In August 1227, Western Xia's fate was sealed. The Mongols breached the capital city. It's said the Tangut king Li Xian officially surrendered, but Genghis Khan was in no mood for mercy. Mongol records claim the Tangut ruler was executed anyway, and the city utterly destroyed. Western Xia disappeared from history at that moment. Indeed, its written records and culture were so thoroughly erased that historians had difficulty learning about them until modern archaeological finds. By this time, Genghis Khan's condition had worsened. In the camp on the Liupan Mountains, with Western Xia dying around him, the Great Khan lay dying as well. On August 18, 1227, Genghis Khan breathed his last. He was likely around 65 years old. The exact circumstances of his death were kept secret by the Mongols, to avoid any sign of weakness to their enemies. It's even possible that news of his passing was concealed for weeks until the campaign was completely over. The conqueror of worlds who seemed invincible had finally met the one foe none can defeat: death. The aftermath of Genghis Khan's death is shrouded in mystery and ritual. The Mongols went to great lengths to hide the Khan's body and final resting place. According to legend, his funeral escort slaughtered anyone they encountered on the way to the burial to keep it secret, and 1,000 horses trampled the gravesite to erase any trace. To this day, Genghis Khan's tomb has never been officially found. It remains one of archaeology's tantalizing mysteries, though many attempts have been made. The secrecy reflected how sacred and significant his loss was to the Mongols. Yet even in death, Genghis Khan was strategic. He had already arranged the succession and division of his empire among his sons. His third son, Ogedei, was designated the Great Khan, supreme ruler, a choice Genghis made to ensure smooth leadership, as Ogedei was known for his even temper and wisdom. There was a 2-year interregnum gap as Mongol princes held a kurultai to formalize this in 1229, but ultimately Ogedei Khan took charge as Genghis's heir. The empire was apportioned among the family. Each son got vast territories to govern. Jochi's sons would get the far west, Chagatai, the Central Asia region, Ogedei, Mongolia, and North China, Tului, the Mongol homeland. Genghis Khan's bloodline would continue to rule and expand the empire for generations. In fact, his descendants would sit on thrones from China, the Yuan dynasty founded by his grandson Kublai Khan, to Persia, the Ilkhans, to Central Asia, Chagatai Khanate, to Russia, the Golden Horde. The unity he forged soon gave way to new rivalries, but at least for a time, the Mongol Empire continued to surge onward even after his death. Genghis Khan died undefeated on the battlefield. His final campaign was a success. Western Xia was destroyed, completing his record of never leaving a task unfinished. In his lifetime, he had conquered more than twice as much land as any other person in history. His empire at the time of his death stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, arguably covering about 11 million square kilometers or more. Larger than the Roman Empire, larger than Alexander's realm, larger than anything the world had seen. And this was just the beginning. Under his heirs, the Mongol conquests would extend even further, reaching into Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and the rest of China. The Mongol armies would ride as far west as Poland and Hungary in 1241, and as far south as the forests of Vietnam and the gates of Baghdad. The largest contiguous land empire in history was set in motion by Genghis Khan, and it would shape the course of nations. When news of Genghis Khan's death eventually spread, there was likely a mix of relief and terror in the wider world. Some of his worst enemies, if any survived, might have sighed in relief that the punishment of God was no more. But for those within the empire and those lands still on the Mongols' horizon, a pressing question remained. Who could possibly fill the void of such a towering figure? As it turned out, his immediate successors were competent and continued his work. Ogedei conquered the Jin fully and invaded Europe. Kublai, a grandson, would conquer China proper. Yet over time, the empire would fragment. By 1368, roughly 140 years later, the Mongol rulers had been ousted from China and other regions, and the empire dissolved into separate khanates. But Genghis Khan's legacy, for better and worse, was forever etched into the lands he conquered. Genghis Khan's impact on history is enormous and complex. He is remembered as one of the most brutal conquerors to ever live, and simultaneously as a visionary leader who revolutionized his society and connected the world. To this day, his name evokes awe and fear. In Mongolia, he is a national hero, the father of the nation. You see his portrait on currency, his name on airports, and his statue, like the massive 40-meter equestrian statue in Sonjin Bulldog, towering proudly. Around the world, he has been variously vilified as a bloodthirsty barbarian or praised as a great military genius and lawmaker. Let's consider the scale of his conquests. By the end of the Mongol expansions, which his children and grandchildren continued, the Mongol Empire covered roughly 23 million square kilometers, 9 million square miles, an area about the size of the entire African continent, making it the largest contiguous empire ever. Genghis Khan personally laid the foundations for this, by conquering huge chunks of Eurasia. He defeated mighty Chinese dynasties, Islamic sultanates, and Eastern European armies. No single figure before or since has ever subdued so many inhabited lands by direct force. Military historians rank him among the greatest strategists and commanders of all time. He and his generals devised tactics, from coordinated cavalry charges and feigned retreats to siege engineering and espionage networks, that were far ahead of their time, enabling relatively small Mongol forces to consistently beat larger, well-established armies. The Mongol horse archers, with their composite bows and superb riding skills, were like the nuclear weapon of the 13th century, a game-changer that dominated battlefields. Genghis Khan's army was also incredibly disciplined and adaptable, using signals, unit tactics, and incorporating the technology of conquered peoples, like Chinese gunpowder and siege weapons, to keep their edge. The cost of these conquests in human lives was staggering. Some estimates suggest the Mongol invasions may have caused the deaths of tens of millions of people across Asia and Europe. Populations of entire regions, like Khwarezm or northern China, may have been reduced by significant percentages. Cities like Baghdad, conquered by Genghis's grandson Hulagu, and Nishapur were so thoroughly sacked that they took centuries to recover. This has led to Genghis Khan being regarded as a harbinger of destruction in many histories. As a 13th century Arab historian wrote with horror, the Mongols were a people from hell. In medieval Europe, chroniclers called them the Tatars, making a pun with Tartarus, Latin for underworld, painting them as demons sent as divine punishment. The psychological impact was immense. Fear of the Mongols lingered long after the actual armies passed. Tales of Mongol atrocities, pyramids of skulls, rivers running red with blood, became part of local folklore from China to Hungary. This terror was very much a tool Genghis consciously used, and it has become an indelible part of his legacy. Yet, there is another side to Genghis Khan's legacy. Once the dust of conquest settled, the Mongol Empire ushered in an era of connectivity and relative peace known as the Pax Mongolica. Under Mongol rule, the Silk Road trade flourished as never before. Genghis Khan and his successors protected merchants and ambassadors, established rest stations and security patrols along trade routes. The result was that goods, technology, and ideas flowed freely across Eurasia. A merchant or traveler, like the famous Marco Polo a few decades later, could journey from Venice to China or from Persia to India under the protection of Mongol authorities. This was unprecedented. East and West came into direct contact. Scholars argue that this exchange helped spark the Renaissance in Europe by bringing in innovations like paper, printing, gunpowder, compass navigation, and new crops. Genghis Khan, who in his youth had never seen a functioning city, inadvertently became a catalyst for globalization of the medieval world. Administratively, Genghis Khan's meritocratic and inclusive approach left a lasting mark. In governing his empire, he often employed talented individuals of many ethnicities: Uyghur scribes, Chinese engineers, Persian administrators, Nestorian Christian advisors, Muslim doctors. He famously valued loyalty and talent over lineage. His chief advisor in later years was Yelu Chukai, a Khitan Chinese statesman who convinced Genghis to tax people rather than slaughter them wholesale, thereby preserving the population and wealth for long-term governance. This advice had enormous consequences. Instead of turning all of northern China into pasture land, an idea some Mongol hardliners had, Genghis Khan began to incorporate the infrastructure of settled societies. The Mongols set up efficient bureaucracies, a relay postal system, the Yam, for rapid communication, and encouraged religious freedom so that Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and others all coexisted under their rule. In some ways, the Mongols under Genghis were ahead of their time. Few rulers in the 13th century were as religiously tolerant or as merit-based in promotions as Genghis Khan was. Genghis Khan also directly shaped the demographics of the regions he conquered. He relocated populations, deporting craftsmen and laborers to places where he needed them. He left behind many Mongol garrisons that eventually assimilated. There is even a striking genetic legacy. A 2003 study famously suggested that 16 million men living today, about 0.5% of the male population, might be descendants of Genghis Khan, due to a particular Y chromosome lineage found across Eurasia. While those numbers are debated, it's clear his offspring were prolific. Genghis took many wives and concubines, as did his sons, spreading his lineage far and wide. In a literal sense, his DNA is still with us. Modern views of Genghis Khan have become more balanced. In Mongolia, he's seen not as a tyrant, but as the unifier and lawgiver, the one who gave the Mongols a written code, protected them from constant tribal war, and put their nation on the map. Mongolian pride in Chinggis is immense. They celebrate him as the founding father who also promoted trade and culture. Internationally, some scholars have stressed his contributions to the formation of the modern world, such as historian Jack Weatherford, whose book, Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, argues that the Khan's empire effectively connected civilizations and spread innovations. Others remind us of the sheer destruction: cities burnt to the ground, populations decimated, a level of violence that might be considered genocidal today. Both are true. Genghis Khan reshaped geography, politics, and even the climate. Some scientists theorize the regrowth of forests in depopulated areas actually scrubbed CO2 from the atmosphere. Few individuals have so sharply affected so many lives. Perhaps the most astonishing aspect of Genghis Khan's legacy is how one man's vision and will could redirect the course of history. Born as an obscure tribesman, he took the fractured, feuding clans of Mongolia and fused them into a fearsome unity. He challenged the biggest powers of his time and won. In doing so, he unintentionally created a bridge across continents. Historian Diana Larry writes that the Mongols spread terror and panic as news of the cities they had razed preceded them. But she also notes they left legacies: the revitalized Silk Road, the movement of peoples and ideas, and perhaps even the concept of religious tolerance in a diverse empire. To the general public, Genghis Khan stands as an archetype of conqueror. His name is in the same breath as Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, or Napoleon, but arguably, Genghis outshines them all in sheer scope. His story, filled with dramatic reversals of fortune, personal courage, and ruthless ambition, has inspired countless books, films, and even video games. He's become a cultural icon, sometimes depicted as a brutal warlord, other times as a wise ruler. In truth, he was a man of his time, extraordinarily tough, pragmatic, and relentless. He believed it was his destiny to conquer the world, and he nearly did. What can we learn from Genghis Khan's life? On one hand, it's a cautionary tale of how immense power wielded without mercy can cause untold suffering. On the other hand, his life exemplifies visionary leadership and adaptability. He rose from nothing, united his people, and implemented innovations that strengthened his nation. His emphasis on merit over aristocracy, loyalty, discipline, and the rule of law, however harsh, helped hold together an empire of unprecedented diversity. Genghis Khan showed that with enough determination and strategic thinking, a small force can change the entire world. Centuries later, the warrior who tried to rule the world still fascinates and appalls us. Genghis Khan's legacy is literally carved into the landscape of Eurasia, in ruined cities, and in thriving metropolises that once lay under his shadow. He shaped history by destroying and by building, by scattering peoples, and by connecting them. Love him or hate him, the mark of Genghis Khan is undeniable. From a boy cast out by his tribe to the great Khan commanding millions, Genghis Khan's life is the ultimate story of rise against the odds. It's hard not to be awed by the arc of his journey. He started with nothing but a vision and ended up changing the face of the earth. His story holds valuable lessons about leadership, resilience, and the double-edged sword of ambition. Genghis Khan teaches us the power of unity and loyalty. He forged one people out of many by inspiring a shared purpose. He shows the importance of innovation. Adopting new tactics and technologies can make even the underdog unbeatable. And his legacy warns us of the destructive potential of unchecked power and vengeance. In a conversational sense, we might ask, what would Genghis Khan say if he could speak to us today? Perhaps something like, aim high, but temper your fury with wisdom. Conquer your challenges completely, but know when to show mercy. His life was full of contradictions, both a destroyer and a creator. And maybe that's why it remains so compelling. We hope you found this deep dive into the life and conquests of Genghis Khan as fascinating as we did. History isn't just dates and battles. It's human drama on the grandest scale, and few stories are grander than this. If you enjoyed exploring the world of Genghis Khan, the warrior who tried to rule the world, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more epic tales of leaders who shaped history. From ancient conquerors to modern visionaries, we bring you the stories that inspire and provoke. Let us know in the comments what you found most surprising about Genghis Khan's journey. Did any of his leadership tactics resonate with you? What legacy of his do you see in our world today? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching and being a part of our history community. Until next time, remember, history lives on in us. As Genghis Khan's story shows, one person truly can change the course of the world. Who knows what each of us might achieve with vision and perseverance? Stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next video. Like, subscribe, and share. And join us again as we journey through time to meet the next great leader who shaped history. Terima kasih, thank you, and bayarte, farewell.